A man covered in dust walked into a luxury cafe, asking only for a glass of water. Moments later, the manager ordered him to leave. But when Keanu Reeves stood up from his seat and walked toward him, no one in that room expected what he'd do next or how it would change an entire city. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow, we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The morning light filtered through the glass walls of a sleek Los Angeles cafe, where the smell of roasted coffee beans mixed with the faint sound of jazz. The place was polished to perfection: chrome counters, white marble tables, and customers dressed as if they were on their way to a film premiere. Every detail spoke of money and reputation. Outside, the city pulsed with motion, but inside this cafe, time seemed to slow for those who could afford to sit still. Keanu Reeves sat in a quiet corner near the window, wearing a black jacket, jeans, and a simple gray shirt. His hair was slightly tousled, his face calm, thoughtful. A notebook rested on the table before him, half filled with sketches and notes. To the other guests, he looked like just another reflective artist, lost in his thoughts. Only those who noticed his face twice realized who he was. But Keanu never invited attention. He enjoyed disappearing into normal life, just another man with coffee and ideas. The bell over the door jingled. Conversations carried on for a moment, until they didn't. Heads turned. A man stepped in, and silence followed him like a shadow. He wore a faded orange vest that had once been neon bright, now dulled by years of sun and grime. His hands were rough and scarred, his boots coated in gray dust. He clutched an old broom handle, which he left carefully by the door. He didn't look dangerous, only tired. His shoulders sagged under invisible weight, the kind that comes from a lifetime of hard work with little thanks. The man's name, though no one there knew it yet, was Jose Mendez. He had spent 20 years sweeping the same downtown streets, picking up trash others never thought twice about. He earned enough to survive, but not enough to be seen. Jose hesitated before stepping fully inside. His eyes darted around the cafe, its glossy tables, its framed art, the people sipping $7 lattes, and then down to his own boots, ashamed of the dirt clinging to them. He removed his hat politely, revealing hair flattened by sweat. With a trembling voice, he said softly, "Excuse me, could I just have a glass of water?" The barista behind the counter froze, uncertain. She glanced toward her manager, a tall man with slick back hair and a shirt too tight around the neck. The manager didn't speak at first. He simply stared at Jose, eyes narrowing slightly, as if measuring the threat to his establishment's image. Around the room, murmurs began to ripple. Some guests pretended not to look. Others didn't bother to hide their discomfort. A woman whispered, "What's he doing here?" Her companion shrugged, lowering his sunglasses. "Probably homeless." "He should know better than to walk into a place like this." Jose swallowed, clutching the brim of his hat. "Just water, please," he repeated, almost apologetically. The barista offered a hesitant smile, but the manager's hand rested on her shoulder. "Sir," he said firmly, "this cafe is for customers only." Jose's lips parted, confusion flickering across his face. I understand. I just need a drink. I've been out in the sun since dawn." The manager crossed his arms. "Then you should have brought your own. We can't have you disturbing our guests." For a moment, the entire cafe held its breath. Even the hum of the espresso machine seemed quieter. Keanu looked up from his notebook, his expression unreadable. He had seen plenty of moments of quiet, cruelty in the world, how easy it was for comfort to blind people to decency. He watched as Jose took a step back, nodding slightly, as if accepting a punishment he'd known all his life. The barista shifted uneasily. "Maybe we could just—" The manager cut her off. "No. Policy." Keanu's gaze lingered on Jose's hands, cracked, darkened with dust, trembling slightly. Those were the hands that cleaned the sidewalk so others could walk freely. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest, that same ache that came whenever he saw dignity dismissed as inconvenience. Jose turned toward the door, his throat dry, his head bowed. Then Keanu closed his notebook. The sound was soft, but in that moment, it felt like thunder. He stood slowly, pushing back his chair. Every eye turned to him as he walked toward the counter. The staff froze. The murmurs hushed again. Keanu's steps were quiet but firm, steady like a man who already knew what he was about to do. When he reached the counter, he didn't say a word. He simply reached for a clean glass from the shelf, filled it with cold water from the tap, and turned toward Jose. Every second stretched out like an eternity. The manager's face stiffened, torn between fear and embarrassment. The customers stared as Keanu walked past them, holding the glass in both hands, as if it were something sacred. He stopped beside Jose, who was frozen near the door, unsure what to do. Keanu extended the glass. "It's hot out," he said quietly. "Please, sit for a moment." Jose blinked, disbelief in his eyes. I don't want to cause trouble." Keanu smiled faintly. "You're not causing trouble. You're reminding people what respect looks like." The cafe went silent again, but this time, the silence felt different, heavier, more human. Jose hesitated, the glass of water glinting between them like something fragile and forbidden. He could feel every stare pressing against his back, every whispered word, cutting into his pride. Yet Keanu's eyes held no judgment, only quiet sincerity. The water was cool, simple, pure. It slid down his throat, washing away hours of heat and exhaustion. For a fleeting second, he forgot where he was. Then he caught sight of the reflections in the cafe's polished windows. People watching, phones lifted, recording. His hand trembled slightly. Keanu gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit," he said softly. "No one here is above anyone else." Jose looked around the room again. Some guests quickly looked away, pretending to check their phones. Others kept filming. The manager's face turned pale, trapped between outrage and fear of public humiliation. Still, Keanu's calm presence disarmed everyone. There was no anger, no confrontation, only kindness, powerful enough to silence arrogance. Jose finally sat, carefully placing the broom beside the chair. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. "I didn't mean to upset anyone," he murmured. "You didn't," Keanu replied. "Sometimes the world just forgets what decency looks like." For a moment, no one moved. The cafe's hum returned faintly, the soft hiss of coffee machines, the faint murmur of disbelief. But beneath it all was something new, something unspoken: shame, reflection, humanity. And as Jose sipped his water, unaware that this simple act of kindness would soon echo across millions of screens, Keanu leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, his quiet defiance already rewriting the room's unspoken rules. The barista, still standing behind the counter, bit her lip as she watched the scene unfold. Moments ago, she had been told to deny a man water. Now she saw a movie star, showing more grace than anyone in the room. Her hands shook as she reached for a cloth, pretending to clean, trying to hide her shame. The manager cleared his throat, forcing a tight smile. "Mr. Reeves, we didn't mean to be rude." "It's just..." Keanu interrupted gently. "It's just what? That kindness doesn't match your decor?" His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried weight. No one laughed. Even the sound of traffic outside seemed distant. Jose looked down, wishing he could disappear. He had spent decades being invisible, but this kind of attention made his skin crawl. Still, he could feel something different in the air, an unexpected dignity rising where there had been humiliation. A young woman sitting near the counter whispered to her friend, "He's right. That man cleans the streets we all walk on." Her friend nodded slowly, guilt softening her expression. Keanu turned back to Jose. "Do you come by this area often?" Jose nodded. "Every morning, I sweep behind this cafe before sunrise." "That means this place is clean because of you," Keanu said quietly. "They should be the ones offering you water." The room fell silent once again. It was no longer about celebrity or status. It was about a truth too simple for most people to admit. As Jose finished his drink, Keanu gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Don't let anyone make you feel small for doing something honest. Jose's eyes glistened. Thank you, sir. Keanu smiled softly. You've already earned more respect than anyone in this room. Just 10 minutes before the man with the broom entered, the cafe was alive with a different kind of noise. The hiss of steaming milk, the laughter of young professionals, the sharp click of phone cameras. At the center of it all stood the cafe manager, Gavin, a man who treated reputation like religion. His crisp white shirt was pressed within an inch of its life, and his shoes reflected the sunlight like mirrors. Behind the counter, two baristas whispered excitedly. Did you hear? One said, eyes wide. That influencer, Madison Hale, is supposed to stop by today. Over 5 million followers. Gavin smiled thinly. Which means no mistakes. Every cup perfect. Every table spotless. Every customer looking like they belong here. We keep our image sharp, he said the last part, while glancing toward a young couple in torn jeans seated near the window. The couple exchanged awkward looks and quickly finished their drinks. Gavin's expression didn't soften until they left. At the far corner, Keanu sat quietly, writing in his notebook, unaware of the staff's fuss. He wasn't there for attention. He enjoyed observing the tiny rhythms of human behavior that revealed more about people than words ever could. His assistant, Jordan, sat across from him, tapping on a tablet. You know, people always find you, no matter where you hide, Jordan murmured, glancing at a group of customers trying not to stare. Keanu smiled slightly. Then maybe I should hide in plain sight. The calm atmosphere shattered when the bell over the door rang. Every head turned as Jose stepped in, broom in hand, vest streaked with dust. His presence was like a ripple through still water. He didn't mean to draw attention, but in this room built for appearances, his simplicity became a disruption. The barista nearest the counter stiffened. Her smile faltered as her eyes darted toward Gavin. He looked up from his checklist, his brows knitting in instant irritation. Can I help you? He asked sharply, before Jose even spoke. Jose removed his hat, eyes lowered. Just a glass of water, please. Gavin's lips tightened. He scanned Jose from head to toe, taking in the patched knees, the sweat-stained collar, the city badge pinned loosely to his vest. The badge read, City Maintenance, Jose Mendez. But instead of respect, Gavin saw only inconvenience. He turned toward the barista. Do not serve him, he whispered. He's not a customer. The barista hesitated. But it's just water. Policy, Gavin snapped. We can't have people thinking this is a shelter. At a nearby table, a group of young women looked up from their phones, curious. One whispered, Why would he come in here? Another chuckled, probably lost. Their laughter was soft, but Jose heard it. He tried to step back, his face flushing. Keanu's pen stopped moving. His eyes lifted to watch the scene unfold. There was no anger in his gaze, just quiet awareness, the kind that saw more than anyone else in the room. He noticed Jose's trembling hand gripping his hat, the wear in his boots, the way his eyes flicked toward the water dispenser behind the counter as though it were something unreachable. Jordan followed his line of sight. Don't, he muttered softly. You'll draw attention. Keanu leaned back slightly, his eyes still on Jose. Sometimes, attention is the only thing that stops cruelty from growing. Gavin straightened his collar and stepped closer to the counter, his tone carrying false politeness. Sir, this is a private establishment, he said, keeping his voice just loud enough for others to hear. We can't serve walk-ins who aren't customers. Jose nodded, clutching his hat against his chest. I understand, sir. I just need a little water. Been out cleaning since dawn. It's hot today. His voice was gentle, respectful. But Gavin only sighed, glancing at the people watching. I'm sorry, but you'll need to find somewhere else. Try the public restroom down the street. He gestured toward the door as though sweeping dust from his perfect floor. The humiliation cut deeper than heat. Jose's shoulders sank, but he didn't argue. He had been turned away before. What was one more door closed? Still, his throat burned with thirst. He looked toward the counter once more, then back to the door. Behind him, a few customers shifted uncomfortably. One older woman whispered, "Just let the man drink." But Gavin ignored her. "We have to maintain standards," he replied, voice cold. "Our clientele expects a certain experience." Keanu's gaze followed every movement. The sharpness of the manager's tone, the stiffness in Jose's posture. It was a picture of how dignity is denied, not with violence, but with quiet, polished contempt. Jordan leaned closer to Keanu. "You don't need to get involved," he whispered. "It's not worth it." Keanu's eyes didn't leave Jose. "Worth it," he murmured. "That's exactly the problem. People only act when it benefits them." Gavin clapped his hands once, as if to dismiss the matter. "Come on, folks, nothing to see here." But his words rang hollow. Everyone had already seen. As Jose turned to leave, Keanu noticed the small tag hanging from his belt, Sanitation Division 7. The edges were worn, the ink faded, but it told a story of hard work and invisibility. Jose stepped toward the door, but a flash of sunlight hit the glass, and in that brief reflection, Keanu saw the man's face clearly lined, weary, and full of a quiet shame he didn't deserve. Something inside Keanu shifted. He remembered being ignored once, back when no one believed in him, when kindness felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. It wasn't the first time he'd seen the world look away from someone who needed help. But this time, the cruelty was right in front of him. Jordan noticed the change in his expression. "You're thinking about doing something, aren't you?" Keanu closed his notebook. "No," he said softly. "I'm thinking about being someone." The cafe's chatter began again, but it sounded different, uneasy, forced. The customers were trying to pretend nothing had happened. Gavin smiled tightly, satisfied that order had been restored. But Keanu's calm eyes stayed fixed on the exit, where Jose was about to walk out into the blinding light, still thirsty, still unseen. And in that moment, Keanu made up his mind. Jose reached for the door handle, his reflection barely visible against the glare of the morning sunday. He paused for a second, his hand trembling slightly, then sighed and turned the handle. The bell above the door gave a faint ring, one that felt final, like a reminder of where he stood in this city's invisible hierarchy. Before he could step outside, Keanu pushed his chair back and stood. The legs scraped gently against the polished floor, and every conversation in the cafe seemed to freeze again. Gavin's face tightened. He immediately sensed trouble. "Mr. Reeves," Gavin began with a strained smile. "If you need anything, we're happy to assist you. Your server will be right." Keanu didn't answer. He walked slowly toward the counter, his expression calm but focused. Every step felt deliberate. Jordan whispered his name in warning, but Keanu didn't stop. He passed by the other customers, who watched in awkward silence, their earlier laughter now replaced by curiosity and guilt. When he reached the counter, Keanu's eyes shifted to the barista. "Could you hand me a glass, please?" The young woman hesitated, glancing nervously at Gavin. Yes, of course." She reached for a clean glass and passed it to him. Keanu filled it with cold water from the dispenser, the sound crisp in the heavy quiet. Then he turned and walked toward Jose, who was halfway out the door. "Sir," Keanu called gently. Jose turned, confused. Keanu held out the glass of water. "You forgot something." Jose froze, not sure what to do. The cafe's attention was locked on the two men, one in worn work clothes, the other in dark jeans and calm defiance. "I can't take that," Jose said softly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room. "It's just water. Everyone deserves that." Gavin's jaw clenched. "Mr. Reeves, please, you don't have to involve yourself in this matter." Keanu turned his head slowly, his tone even. "Then why didn't you?" The question hung in the air like a weight. No one dared to breathe. The staff froze behind the counter. The customers avoided eye contact. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Keanu handed Jose the glass, his hand steady. "Take it," he said simply. "You've earned it more than most." Jose hesitated, then accepted it, his eyes glistening. The cool water trembled in the glass, catching the light. He took a slow sip, and the entire cafe seemed to exhale. Jordan sat back at their table, watching in silence. He had seen Keanu give money to strangers before, comfort grieving fans, and stop to talk with people no one else noticed. But this moment felt different. There was no camera, no stage, no press, only humanity standing face to face with its own reflection. Keanu glanced at Jose's badge again, his eyes softening. "City Maintenance Jose Mendez," he said quietly. "That means you clean up after all of us. You keep this place beautiful. And this is how they treat you?" Jose shook his head faintly, embarrassed. "It's fine, sir. People don't mean harm. They just forget we're people too." Keanu's expression didn't change, but something in his silence said more than words could. Around the cafe, the mood had shifted. The air was no longer filled with judgment. It was filled with recognition. In that stillness, respect finally returned to the man everyone had ignored. The cafe had fallen into a silence so heavy it could almost be felt. The hum of conversation, the soft clinking of silverware, the hiss of the espresso machine, all of it faded into a single moment that no one quite knew how to react to. Keanu Reeves stood beside the dusty street sweeper, his calm presence transforming the air in the room. He set the glass of water on the counter, the sound of it meeting the surface sharper than it should have been. Then, with complete composure, he placed it gently into Jose's trembling hands. The man stared at it as though it were made of crystal and gold. He looked from the glass to Keanu's face, searching for mockery but finding only quiet sincerity. "It's hot out," Keanu said softly. "You look like you've had a long day." The words were simple, but they carried something deeper, a recognition Jose hadn't heard in years. People usually passed him without a glance, as if he were part of the sidewalk. But here, in a room full of polished shoes and perfect smiles, someone had finally seen him. Jose hesitated before answering. "They said I shouldn't be here," he murmured, still clutching the glass. Keanu gave a faint, understanding smile. "Then they don't know who keeps this city alive." That single sentence struck harder than any public speech could. Around them, heads turned. The soft scrape of chairs filled the silence as guests shifted awkwardly. Some lowered their eyes, others tried to look busy. The manager, Gavin, froze behind the counter, his confident expression cracking. He tried to force a polite laugh, but it didn't come. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone carried quiet authority, the kind that comes from someone who doesn't speak for attention, but because he believes what he's saying. Jose looked down at his calloused hands, wrapped around the cool glass. His throat tightened. "I don't think anyone's ever said something like that to me before," he said. Keanu gestured toward the nearby table. "Come, sit." Jose hesitated again. The looks from other customers still made him uneasy. But there was something disarming about Keanu's presence, something steady and calm that told him it was safe. Slowly, he followed, sitting across from the actor, his broom leaning against the wall. The barista stood frozen behind the counter, eyes wide. She wanted to apologize, but didn't know how. The manager whispered sharply, "Get back to work." But his voice lacked the confidence it once had. Keanu noticed her discomfort but said nothing. Instead, he turned his full attention to Jose. "How long have you been doing this job?" he asked. "Almost 20 years. Jose replied quietly. "Started after my wife passed. Needed steady work, and the city always needs cleaning." He gave a faint smile. "Most people don't notice what I do until the trash piles up." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's the thing about good people," he said. "They're easy to miss because they're always busy fixing what others ignore." For a moment, neither man spoke. Around them, the cafe remained silent, yet the energy in the room had changed. The man everyone ignored had become the center of attention, and somehow, it didn't feel uncomfortable anymore. It felt necessary. Jose's eyes darted around the cafe, unsure if he should even stay seated. He could feel the glances, some curious, some judgmental, others strangely softened. but Keanu's calm demeanor anchored him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an inconvenience. He felt human. The air conditioner hummed overhead, blowing a cool breeze against Jose's sweat-soaked shirt. He took a small sip of water, his throat tightening, as if trying to swallow his own disbelief. "I didn't mean to interrupt anyone's morning," he said quietly. "I just needed a drink." Keanu leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You didn't interrupt anything," he said. "You reminded us all that decency shouldn't depend on what someone looks like." Gavin, the manager, cleared his throat sharply from behind the counter. "Mr. Reeves," he began nervously, "we appreciate your kindness, but please understand our clientele." Keanu turned his head, his voice still low but firm. "Your clientele includes everyone who walks through that door thirsty, hungry, or tired. You serve people, not reputations." The words carried across the cafe, quiet, yet impossible to ignore. The manager's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His authority had evaporated under the weight of simple truth. At the nearby tables, people began to murmur again, but differently now. A young man whispered, "He's right." Another nodded. "Can you believe that guy was going to kick him out for water?" A teenage girl at the window discreetly lifted her phone, capturing the scene in a short video. Her hands shook as she whispered, "No one's going to believe this." Meanwhile, Jose shifted in his seat, eyes wide. "I don't want to cause any trouble for you," he said. "I know people don't want someone like me sitting here." Keanu gave a faint smile. "Someone like you? You mean someone who works hard, takes care of this city, and asks for almost nothing in return?" "That sounds like someone this world could use more of." Jose blinked, unsure how to respond. The words settled deep in his chest, stirring something long-buried dignity. The same dignity that had been stripped away piece by piece through years of indifference and polite rejection. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a few bills, placing them under his empty coffee cup. "Now you're a customer," he said. "So, if anyone here has a problem with that, they can take it up with me." The barista's breath caught. For the first time, she smiled genuinely, with relief. Jose looked down at the table, his lips trembling between a smile and tears he didn't want to show. The cafe's atmosphere had shifted completely. Where there had been tension, there was now an awkward quiet, almost reverent. Even the clinking of cups felt gentler. Outside, sunlight spilled through the window, landing across Jose's face. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the warmth sink in. For once, he didn't feel invisible. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his calmness cutting through the uneasy air that still lingered. Around them, the cafe remained quiet, every patron aware that they were witnessing something that didn't happen every day. People who had come for luxury lattes and business calls now found themselves holding their breath, unsure how to act. Jose stared at the condensation, running down the side of his glass, unable to speak. "No one's ever done something like this for me," he finally said. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from a kind of disbelief that comes when kindness feels too big to accept. Keanu shook his head slightly. "I didn't do anything special," he replied. "I just gave you water, but I think it's the world that's gotten too used to forgetting simple things." From the counter, Gavin tried to compose himself, pretending to organize receipts that didn't need sorting. Every second he stayed silent made his discomfort more visible. A few customers shot him disapproving looks, and for once, he couldn't meet their eyes. At another table, an older woman set down her phone and whispered, "That's the kind of man this city needs." Her husband nodded, shame flickering across his face. "We all walked right past him," he said softly. Keanu turned back to Jose. "What's your name?" "Jose Mendez," he answered, almost apologetically. "Well, Mr. Mendez," Keanu said with quiet respect, "you've been serving this city longer than most people in this room have been thanking it." Jose blinked rapidly, the weight of the compliment leaving him speechless. He had spent decades cleaning sidewalks, bus stops, and alleyways, each day blending into the next. To hear his name spoken with such respect, especially by someone he admired from afar, stirred something powerful inside him. The teenage girl filming put her phone down slowly, whispering to her friend, He's treating him like he's the mayor or something." Her friend shook her head. "No," she said. "He's treating him like a person." Keanu noticed a small patch of dust still clinging to Jose's sleeve. Without hesitation, he picked up a napkin from the table and wiped it gently. The gesture was so quiet, so unassuming, that it stunned everyone who saw it. "Don't worry about the dirt," Keanu said softly. "The city leaves plenty of that on all of us." Jose laughed faintly through his tears, the sound half broken, half relieved. "You talk like you know what it feels like," he said. Keanu looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "Everyone's been unseen at some point in their life," he said. "But it's what we do when we finally see others that matters." The cafe stayed silent. No one sipped coffee. No one took another bite of their pastry. Every camera phone was now turned toward them, not out of mockery, but because people understood, maybe for the first time, that they were witnessing decency in its purest form. And at the center of it all sat two men, one world famous, one invisible, sharing a single glass of water that had become a symbol of what humanity should still mean. The silence in the cafe didn't last long. Once the first whispers started, they spread like ripples through still water. A woman in a pearl necklace leaned toward her friend and muttered, "Can you believe that?" Keanu Reeves, sitting with a janitor. Her tone carried that peculiar mix of curiosity and condescension that fills spaces where privilege feels challenged. Her friend gave a small shrug, sipping her latte. "He must be making some kind of statement," she said, as though kindness required explanation, probably for charity or publicity. "You know how celebrities are." Across the room, a businessman in a suit smirked and whispered, "This'll be all over the internet by noon." Reeves always needs a headline. His companion chuckled, pulling out his phone, pretending to check emails while secretly recording. Keanu didn't seem to hear them, or maybe he did, but chose not to. His attention remained on Jose, who sat across from him, hunched slightly, still nervous under the weight of so many eyes. Keanu leaned forward just enough to make the world disappear between them. "So," he said softly, "you clean this area often?" Jose nodded. "Every morning. I start 2 blocks down, near the intersection. Then, I sweep the alleys behind this cafe before sunrise." Keanu smiled faintly. Before anyone else wakes up, Jose's lips curved into a small, tired grin. "Exactly. By the time people come in for breakfast, it already looks clean. No one ever sees the trash, just the shine after." He paused, looking toward the polished glass walls. "Maybe even theirs," he added, motioning to the fancy coffee cups left behind. Keanu's expression softened. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same people who whispered behind manicured fingers about the man in the orange vest were sipping drinks in comfort because of his labor. Jordan, watching from the corner, shook his head quietly. He had worked with Keanu for years and knew this was more than a passing moment. Keanu had a way of noticing what others didn't, of turning small acts into lessons. Gavin, the manager, fidgeted near the counter, pretending to adjust decorations. The sight of Keanu sitting with Jose was unraveling everything he thought he knew about control. "This is a luxury cafe," he whispered under his breath, as if trying to convince himself. "Not a public park." But the crowd wasn't entirely on his side anymore. The barista's eyes darted between Keanu and Jose, guilt pressing at her chest. She had served countless lattes to people who never said thank you. Now, watching a man famous across the world show respect to someone no one noticed, she felt something shift inside her. The whispers continued, some mocking, some unsure, some quietly admiring. But Keanu and Jose seemed untouched by any of it. Their conversation, humble and human, had created a space where judgment couldn't quite reach. The low murmur of voices filled the cafe again, but it sounded different this time. There was discomfort hidden beneath the chatter, an awareness that something about this moment didn't fit the world they were used to. A few customers shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure whether to keep watching or pretend they hadn't seen anything. At one table, a young couple tried to act casual. The man whispered, "It's just strange, isn't it? A celebrity sitting with a street sweeper." The woman frowned, stirring her coffee without looking up. Maybe what's strange is that we think it's strange. Her words hung in the air like a quiet challenge, one that neither of them dared to unpack. Meanwhile, Keanu and Jose kept talking, as if none of it mattered. Keanu asked about Jose's routine, how early he started, and whether he ever took breaks. Jose chuckled softly. Breaks? Not really. The city doesn't clean itself. I usually eat my breakfast out of a paper bag, beans, maybe some bread, then I keep going. There's always more trash waiting. Keanu nodded slowly. How many people are on your team? Used to be 5 of us, Jose replied. Now it's just 3. The others got better jobs, I guess. But I don't mind. The streets feel like mine now. I know every corner, every tree, every crack in the pavement. It's quiet work. Keanu smiled. Quiet work is often the most important. Jose looked down, tracing a faint line of dirt on his sleeve. I don't think anyone ever said that to me. From another table, the businessman who had been recording finally lowered his phone. He watched Jose more carefully now, his smirk fading. For the first time, he seemed unsure which side of the moment he was on. The teenage girl from earlier whispered to her friend, "He's not doing this for attention. Look at him. He's just listening." Her friend nodded. It's kind of amazing, actually. The barista brought over a fresh cup of coffee for Keanu, setting it down gently. Then, to everyone's surprise, she placed another cup in front of Jose. On the house, she said quietly. Jose's eyes widened. Ma'am, I can't. It's fine, she interrupted softly. Thank you for what you do. Keanu looked up at her, smiling in approval. That's how it starts, he said. One person remembers, and then another. The woman in pearls rolled her eyes. This is ridiculous, she muttered. He's just a janitor. Her friend gave her a sharp look. And you're just a customer. What's the difference? The words silenced the corner of the cafe. A quiet truth had landed where gossip once thrived. Jose lifted the cup to his lips, the smell of fresh coffee filling his senses. It wasn't just a drink, it was acceptance, served warm for the first time in years. Jose sipped his coffee slowly, his fingers trembling slightly around the porcelain cup. It had been years since anyone had offered him something like this without suspicion or pity. The rich aroma filled his lungs, mixing with the faint hum of conversation around them. For once, the attention didn't sting, it simply existed, like sunlight on his skin after a long winter. Keanu watched him quietly, his elbows resting on the table, his voice steady and kind. You ever think about doing something else? Jose shook his head, smiling, faintly. I used to dream about starting a small repair shop, he said. I'm good with my hands. But after my wife passed, I just needed something steady. Sweeping keeps me moving. It's honest work. Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. Honest work is the foundation of this city. But it's strange, isn't it? The ones who hold it together are usually the ones people look through. Jose's eyes softened. You see that too? I've seen it all my life, Keanu said. In film, in the streets, in the way people treat waiters or cleaners. It's easy to thank the people above us. It takes character to thank the people who serve quietly. At another table, a group of young professionals sat frozen, their coffee growing cold. One of them finally spoke. He's right, she said. We walk past people like him every day and don't even say hello. Her coworker nodded slowly, shame flickering across his face. I threw a cup out my car window this morning. I didn't even think someone would have to pick it up. The older couple near the window exchanged a look. The wife whispered, Do you think he's teaching them something? Her husband replied softly, I think he's reminding all of us. Gavin, still behind the counter, rubbed his temple as if the sight itself was giving him a headache. He muttered, This is going to ruin our reputation. Keanu turned his head slightly, having heard him. No, he said calmly. It's going to fix it. That simple line silenced Gavin completely. The cafe felt different now, less like a temple of status, more like a place where people could breathe again. Jose chuckled softly, breaking the tension. You know, I probably clean up this block more than anyone here visits it. Keanu grinned. then that makes you the real local celebrity. The joke drew a few reluctant laughs from nearby tables. Even those who had scoffed earlier found themselves smiling, if only because the tension had cracked. Jose looked around, still unsure how to exist in this kind of attention. "I don't think I'll ever get used to people looking at me like this," he said quietly. "Maybe that's the point," Keanu replied. "Maybe they're finally seeing you for the first time." The cafe door opened briefly, letting in a rush of warm air and the sound of city traffic. For a fleeting second, it felt like the outside world had changed too, if only just a little. And as Keanu lifted his cup to toast the man beside him, even the whispers faded into silence. The teenage girl in the corner had her phone tilted just enough to catch the moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she whispered to her friend, "Record this. No one's going to believe it." The screen reflected the image of Keanu Reeves sitting beside a man in a faded orange vest, both sharing coffee in a cafe where kindness had become the rarest luxury. With a few taps, she posted the clip on social media with the caption, "Keanu Reeves just poured water for a street sweeper, while everyone else ignored him." Within seconds, it began to spread. But inside the cafe, no one knew yet that the world outside was already watching. The atmosphere remained thick with unease. Gavin, the manager, adjusted his tie and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stepped from behind the counter and walked toward Keanu's table, each step heavy with discomfort. "Mr. Reeves," he began, his tone falsely polite. "We appreciate your kindness, truly. But this gentleman is, well, he's making some of our guests uncomfortable." Jose immediately began to rise. "I can leave," he said softly, already pushing his chair back. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Keanu's hand rested gently on Jose's arm. "You're not leaving," he said calmly. "You're having a drink." The quiet firmness in his voice made even the nearby customers sit still. He turned his gaze toward Gavin, his expression unreadable but steady. "You said he's making people uncomfortable," Keanu said slowly. "But have you asked yourself why?" Gavin hesitated, caught off guard. "Well, it's just this is a private establishment, and we have a certain atmosphere to maintain." Keanu nodded slightly. "And you think that atmosphere depends on who looks clean enough to deserve a glass of water?" The question hung in the air like a challenge no one dared answer. The cafe went silent again, the tension sharp enough to cut through the music playing faintly in the grate. Background. Even the barista stopped mid-pour, holding her breath. "The only thing disrupting this place," Keanu said evenly, "is arrogance." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The words landed like a quiet storm, steady and unshakable. Gavin froze, the color draining from his face. A few customers shifted uncomfortably, realizing their own reflections in that single sentence. Somewhere across the room, the sound of another phone camera clicked, then another, and another. Jose sat back down slowly, uncertain. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup again. Keanu nodded at him reassuringly. "You're fine," he said gently. "Just breathe. Let them be the ones who feel out of place for once." The teenage girl looked down at her screen, where the first few comments were already appearing under her post. "This man never fails to amaze me. Proof that kindness still exists. I'm crying watching this." The story was already leaving the cafe, but inside, the lesson was still unfolding. Gavin's forced smile began to fade. His authority, the kind that fed on people's silence, was slipping away. For a moment, he looked as though he might argue, but then his eyes met Keanu's calm, unwavering gaze. It wasn't a challenge, but something even more powerful: quiet conviction. Gavin cleared his throat, his voice suddenly unsure. "Mr. Reeves, I'm only following policy. We have to protect the cafe's image." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "If your image depends on turning away a man who keeps your streets clean, then maybe the problem isn't the man, it's the mirror you're looking into." The manager blinked, speechless. A few gasps rippled through the room. A businessman near the window leaned back in his chair and whispered, "He's right, though." His companion nodded faintly, lowering her eyes. The teenage, girl filming tried not to move, her phone catching every second of the exchange. The cafe, once proud of its glossy reputation, was now caught in an unexpected moment of moral reckoning. Jose shifted in his seat again, visibly uncomfortable. "Please," he murmured. "I can just go. I don't want to get anyone in trouble." Keanu turned back to him, his voice gentle. "You haven't done anything wrong. You're just sitting here, having a drink. You belong wherever respect exists." The line landed with quiet force. A few people clapped softly, not sure if they should, but unable to stay silent. Gavin stiffened, his face tight with embarrassment. The barista glanced at him nervously, then decided she had seen enough. She turned, walked to the espresso machine, and began making another cup of coffee, this time for Jose. Keanu gave her a grateful nod. "That's kindness," he said softly, "not policy." Her cheeks flushed as she set the fresh cup in front of Jose, who stared at it as if it were the most foreign gift in the world. "Thank you," he whispered. Gavin tried one last time to save face. "Mr. Reeves, I really don't think—" Keanu interrupted him, his tone still calm but firm. "That's the problem, Gavin. You're thinking about reputation. I'm thinking about humanity." The cafe was utterly still now. No one sipped coffee. No one scrolled their phones. Even the usual hum of machinery seemed to fade into the background. Then, quietly, someone near the door began to clap again. This time, it grew tentative at first, then certain. The sound spread like sunlight breaking through fog. Jose's eyes welled up, his hand trembling slightly as he wiped them with his sleeve. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. Keanu smiled faintly. "You don't need to say anything. You've already said it with how you live." Outside the cafe, unnoticed by those inside, notifications began to explode across social media. The post had crossed thousands of shares. News sites were already reposting it. The world had found its next story, but inside the cafe, the moment was still intimate, still real. By now, nearly everyone in the cafe had their phones out. Some filmed quietly. Others pretended not to while sneaking photos from behind their cups. The room had become a mixture of tension and reverence, every movement steeped in awareness that something meaningful was happening before their eyes. Keanu sat calmly, the same quiet presence as before. He wasn't grandstanding, wasn't preaching. He simply existed with grace, and that alone seemed to make the air vibrate differently. He turned slightly toward Jose, who was still trying to make sense of the attention. "You okay?" Keanu asked. Jose nodded slowly. "I think so. I've never had people look at me like this." Keanu smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time they start." Gavin hovered near the counter, unsure what to do. His face was pale, his authority completely dismantled. The cafe he had worked so hard to polish suddenly felt smaller, its luxury meaningless under the weight of one small act of respect. He muttered something about company policy, but his voice cracked halfway through, disappearing into the hum of quiet conversations. A middle-aged man seated by the window spoke up, his tone unexpectedly firm. "You should be thanking him," he said, nodding toward Jose. "You wouldn't have this spotless sidewalk outside if not for him." The comment drew murmurs of agreement. The crowd that had once whispered judgment now spoke with shame and admiration. Even those who had sneered minutes earlier began to shift their tone, as if trying to rewrite their part in the story. Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He just looked around the cafe and said, "It's strange, isn't it? How quickly kindness becomes controversial." A few people smiled awkwardly, others lowered their phones. The moment was uncomfortable but necessary. It revealed the truth of how people behaved when no one was watching, and how that truth could change when someone finally was. Outside, the city continued as usual, unaware that a video of this very conversation was already climbing toward 100,000 views. Comment sections flooded with words like, "This is why we love him, he's a real one," and "humanity restored." Inside, Jose took another careful sip of coffee, trying to hold on to the reality of it all. "I don't know what happens after this," he said quietly. "I'm just a street sweeper. Tomorrow I'll still be cleaning the same sidewalks." Keanu leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe," he said softly, but today reminded everyone that those sidewalks are sacred because of you." Jose's eyes shimmered, his breath catching in his throat. He wasn't used to being thanked, let alone honored. The teenage girl lowered her phone, watching him instead of filming. For the first time, she realized the story wasn't about celebrity, it was about decency. When Keanu stood, the cafe instinctively rose with him. No one told them to, they just did. He looked around once more and said, "This man isn't disrupting your peace. He's showing you what it should look like." And with that, the quiet applause that followed wasn't for fame or spectacle, it was for humanity rediscovered. The cafe slowly settled into a quieter rhythm again, but Keanu's mind had drifted elsewhere. As Jose sat across from him sipping coffee in silence, something in the man's tired eyes pulled him back in time, back to a place far from Los Angeles, far from fame, to a memory that still glowed faintly in the corners of his mind. He could see it clearly. A dim film studio in Toronto, years ago. He was 16, still uncertain of who he was or who he wanted to be. His mother, Patricia, worked long hours as a costume designer. Some nights she would bring him to the set because she couldn't afford a sitter. The sound stages always smelled of fabric glue and sweat, and the bright lights made everything feel unreal. On one of those nights, the studio was nearly empty, except for a janitor mopping the floors. Keanu remembered watching him, fascinated by how patiently he moved, how he hummed softly to himself as he worked. The man was older, with deep lines across his face, wearing a faded blue uniform with a name tag that read Frank. Keanu had been sitting on a folding chair, waiting for his mother to finish sewing a hem, when his stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since morning. His mother, too busy to notice, had told him to be patient. He had tried, but the hunger stung. Frank must have heard the sound, because he stopped mopping and looked over. "You hungry, kid?" he asked, his voice warm but rough, like gravel smoothed by time. Keanu nodded shyly. "A little." The janitor smiled and reached into his bag. He pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and held it out. "Take it. My wife makes too many, anyway." Keanu hesitated. "I can't. That's yours." Frank chuckled softly. "Kid, when someone offers you kindness, don't turn it down. It's the only thing that keeps dignity alive." Those words stuck, even as he took the sandwich, even as he watched Frank return to mopping under the harsh fluorescent lights. They planted something deep in him. A belief that kindness wasn't weakness, but strength disguised as humility. Now, sitting across from Jose, that memory felt alive again. The same quiet generosity that Frank had shown him was there in Jose's eyes. The endurance of people who worked hard with little recognition. Keanu blinked, coming back to the present. He studied Jose's rough hands, the faint streak of dust on his sleeve, the way his shoulders curved slightly as if carrying invisible weight. Jose asked, noticing his faraway look. Keanu nodded slowly, smiling. "Yeah, just remembered someone who once reminded me of you." Jose raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? Another street cleaner?" Keanu laughed softly. "A janitor, actually. He taught me something that never left me." "What's that?" "That kindness is the only thing that keeps dignity alive." Jose stared at him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Sounds like a wise man." "He was," Keanu said quietly. "Just like you." Keanu's gaze drifted back toward the cafe window. Outside, the city shimmered with late morning light. Cars passed, people hurried down sidewalks, oblivious to the quiet moment unfolding inside. But in his mind, he was still standing in that old Toronto studio, a skinny teenager holding a janitor's sandwich under the hum of fluorescent lights. He remembered how Frank had sat with him during his break, resting his mop against the wall. "You want to know something, kid?" Frank had said. "People see a mop and think that's all you are. They don't see that you're cleaning up after their mistakes." Keanu had nodded, too young to grasp the full meaning, but old enough to feel its truth. Frank had smiled at him kindly. "You don't have to be rich to have pride. You just have to care about what you do. And when you care, you leave the world a little better than you found it. Even then, Keanu had known he was hearing something important, words that would matter long after that studio floor was gone. It was the first time he realized dignity didn't come from applause, or fame, or position. It came from how you treated others when no one was watching. That lesson had followed him through life. He had seen arrogance dressed as success, cruelty wrapped in smiles, and power used to belittle. But he had also seen quiet acts of goodness, people like Frank, people like Jose, whose worth wasn't written in headlines, but in the way they made others feel seen. Inside the café, Jose was still sipping his coffee carefully, as if afraid to waste a drop. Keanu studied him for a moment, struck by how familiar that humility was. It was the same kind Frank had carried, the same kind his mother had worn when she stayed up late sewing costumes until her fingers bled. He took a breath. "When I was a kid," Keanu began softly, "there was this janitor who worked at a film studio. I didn't have money, didn't even have dinner that night. He gave me half his sandwich. I tried to say no, but he told me that kindness is what keeps dignity alive." Jose listened, eyes focused, his expression gentle. "He was right," he said. "My father used to say something like that. He told me that when you sweep the streets, you're not just cleaning the city, you're giving people a place they can walk with pride." Keanu smiled. "Sounds like your father and Frank would have gotten along." Jose chuckled quietly, his shoulders easing a little. "Maybe they're having a coffee together up there right now, talking about how stubborn we both are." Keanu laughed softly. The sound broke through the tension that still lingered in the cafe. For the first time since Jose walked in, it felt normal, two men from very different worlds, finding common ground in the simple truth that dignity had no dress code. And as the laughter faded, Keanu knew exactly why this moment mattered. It wasn't about the coffee, or the crowd, or even the cameras. It was about remembering what Frank had taught him, that true strength never needed to shout. Keanu's eyes softened as he thought about the years that had passed since that night in the studio. Frank had passed away long before Keanu became famous, long before the world cared to know his name, yet his words remained, echoing in every quiet act of decency Keanu tried to carry forward. He remembered returning to that same studio years later, long after Frank was gone. The floor still gleamed under the lights, but the man who gave it its shine was missing. Keanu had found a new janitor there, a younger man who didn't know Frank but still swept the same corners with the same tired care. Keanu had asked him how the job was going. The man smiled and said, "It's work that nobody notices until it's not done." That sentence had stayed with him too. It reminded him that the most vital people in any place were often the most invisible. And now, sitting in a polished cafe surrounded by people obsessed with appearance, that truth hit harder than ever. Jose glanced at him, breaking the silence. "You're thinking about that man again, aren't you?" he asked softly. Keanu smiled faintly. "Yeah, I never got to thank him properly, but I think he'd be proud of what you're doing." Jose tilted his head, confused. "Proud of me? I just clean the streets." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You keep the world walkable, Jose. You make it possible for people to live their lives without stepping over chaos. Most people don't notice, but they should." Jose looked down, emotion flickering in his eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if it matters. You clean one street, and the next day, it's dirty again." Keanu's tone was gentle. "It matters, because every morning, you start again. That's what makes it beautiful." The barista standing nearby overheard and froze in place, her hand still on a coffee pot. She realized how shallow her earlier judgment had been. She glanced toward the door, where sunlight was streaming through the glass, dust swirling in its path. For the first time, she thought about who swept it away every morning. Gavin, still behind the counter, had gone quiet too. His earlier arrogance had drained into something like regret. He looked at Jose and then at Keanu. The way they talked, it wasn't a celebrity showing off for the cameras, it was two human beings sharing truth that money couldn't buy. Keanu glanced toward him briefly, not in anger, but in understanding. Then he turned back to Jose. "You know, Frank once told me something else. He said, Don't waste your life trying to look clean in other people's eyes. Just keep your hands clean in your own." Jose nodded slowly, taking those words in. "That's a good way to live," he said. "I wish more people thought like that." Keanu smiled softly. "Maybe they will. Maybe today changes a little bit of that." Jose's eyes met his, and in that moment, there was no gap between actor and worker, between fame and obscurity. There were just two men who understood what it meant to live with quiet pride. As the cafe's silence settled again, Keanu leaned back, the memory of Frank's kind face still lingering. And for the first time in years, he felt like he'd repaid a debt by passing one act of kindness forward, from a janitor to a street sweeper, across a lifetime. By now, the cafe had transformed into something unrecognizable. The sound of spoons against saucers had stopped. Conversations were hushed. Even the soft music in the background seemed too loud. Gavin, the manager, stood behind the counter with his arms crossed, pretending to organize receipts while his mind raced. His business depended on image, and in his mind, this entire scene was spiraling out of control. He leaned toward one of the baristas and whispered harshly, "Get him out before this becomes a scandal." The young woman froze. "But sir, I don't care," Gavin hissed. "That man doesn't belong here. We're not a charity. Call security." The barista hesitated, her voice trembling. "Mr. Reeves is still sitting with him." "I said call security," Gavin repeated, his voice sharp but quiet. "We can't afford bad press from this kind of situation." Moments later, a tall man in a black uniform entered the cafe, his expression neutral. The security guard had been working in the area for years, and he knew Gavin well. He approached the table where Keanu and Jose sat, glancing uneasily between them. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he began carefully, "but I've been asked to handle a situation." "Sir," he said, looking at Jose, "I'm afraid you'll have to leave." Jose blinked, startled. His shoulders slumped, the warmth from his coffee instantly replaced by shame. "I understand," he murmured. "I'll go." But before he could rise, Keanu spoke. "No," he said simply. His tone wasn't angry or loud, it was steady, resolute. "He's not leaving." The guard hesitated. "Sir, I've been instructed by management." Keanu stood up slowly. His height, calm composure, and quiet authority filled the space without effort. "He's my guest," he said firmly. "And I don't let my guests be treated like they're less than human." The guard shifted uncomfortably, looking toward Gavin for direction. Gavin's face turned pale, but he straightened his tie and stepped forward, forcing a smile that didn't hide his irritation. "Mr. Reeves," he said smoothly, "we deeply respect your work, but this isn't good for our brand." Keanu looked directly at him. "Then maybe," he said calmly, "you need a new brand, one that includes humanity." A ripple ran through the cafe. The people seated near the counter exchanged glances. The sentence hit harder than anything else that morning. Even those who had been judgmental earlier felt the sting of truth in his words. Gavin tried to recover. "You don't understand, Mr. Reeves," he said stiffly. "We have policies." Keanu crossed his arms lightly. "Policies that protect your reputation but crush someone's dignity aren't worth following." The security guard stood frozen, unsure of which command to obey. The barista looked between them, silently praying this wouldn't end in humiliation. Jose stared down at his cup, whispering, "I should have just stayed outside." Keanu turned toward him gently. "You did nothing wrong," he said. "The only mistake here is thinking kindness is bad for business." The cafe had never been quieter. The weight of Keanu's words hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. The security guard looked torn between duty and conscience, his eyes shifting from Gavin's impatient glare to Keanu's calm but unshakable expression. "Mr. Reeves," Gavin said again, his voice lowering into a strained whisper. "Please, you're making this harder than it needs to be. You don't understand the kind of clientele we serve. They come here for a certain level of comfort, not..." He hesitated, glancing uneasily at Jose. "Not this kind of scene." Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. "Comfort built on excluding people isn't comfort," he replied. "It's cowardice." The words hit harder than Gavin expected. He opened his mouth to respond. Nothing came. For the first time, the carefully crafted walls of superiority he hid behind felt paper-thin. He could sense the other customers watching him not as a manager anymore, but as a man being quietly judged. The barista, still standing near the espresso machine, suddenly stepped forward. Her voice was small but steady. "He's right," she said. "I'm sorry, sir, but he's right. This isn't how people should be treated." Gavin turned toward her, his face flushing. "You're an employee," he snapped. "You don't get to decide what's right for this business." Keanu's tone remained calm. "Maybe it's time you listen to someone who still remembers what's right." The barista lowered her gaze, but she didn't retreat. The act itself was enough to tilt the balance of the room. Jose looked around, deeply uncomfortable. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said softly. "Please, Mr. Reeves, I can just go. I'm used to it." Keanu turned toward him, his expression warm but firm. "Don't say that," he replied. "You shouldn't be used to being treated like you don't belong. No one should." He looked back at Gavin. "I've worked in this city a long time. I've met people with billions of dollars and people with none. And I'll tell you something. The people who make me proud to live here aren't the ones who buy everything. They're the ones who build it, clean it, repair it, and keep it alive." The words reached every corner of the cafe. The young couple by the window exchanged guilty glances. The businessman near the counter stopped pretending to type on his laptop. Even the security guard lowered his head slightly, his voice quieter now. "Mr. Reeves, if you say he's your guest, then he stays." Gavin froze. "You can't just—" "Yes, I can," the guard interrupted softly. "Because sometimes doing what's right means forgetting about rules for a minute." The small rebellion sent a Sunday murmur through the cafe. For the first time, Gavin realized the power in the room had shifted completely away from him. He looked around helplessly, seeing customers nodding in quiet agreement, his control slipping like sand through his fingers. Keanu exhaled slowly, then sat back down beside Jose. "Now," he said, with a calm smile, "let's finish our coffee." Gavin stood frozen for several seconds, unsure what to do. The authority he'd clung to had vanished, replaced by something quieter and far stronger conscience. Around the room, every eye was on him, waiting to see what kind of man he truly was when the script of professionalism fell apart. His jaw tightened, but his confidence was gone. Keanu's calm presence filled the space again, steady and unbothered. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. His silence was its own kind of pressure, one that forced Gavin to confront the truth he'd been trying to ignore. "You think kindness threatens your image," Keanu said finally. "But maybe the problem isn't who's sitting in your cafe. Maybe it's what you've chosen to value." Gavin looked down at the polished floor, his reflection faintly visible beneath him. He thought of the years he'd spent building this business, every decision based on keeping the place exclusive, spotless, desirable. But for the first time, he saw that cleanliness wasn't the same as goodness. The security guard took a slow step back, understanding that this was no longer about policy, it was about pride. The barista wiped her hands nervously on her apron, then spoke up again, voice trembling but brave. "Sir, maybe this is a good thing. People are watching. Maybe they'll see us differently after this." Gavin shot her a weary glance, but didn't reply. His attention shifted to Jose, who was sitting quietly, his hat in his hands, unsure where to look. "You clean outside this cafe, don't you?" Gavin asked quietly. Jose nodded slowly, every morning before sunrise. Gavin hesitated, then sighed. "I never noticed." "That's okay," Jose said gently. "Most people don't." The simplicity of the answer disarmed him. For the first time that day, Gavin's voice lost its edge. "You shouldn't have been treated this way," he admitted softly. "I was wrong." Keanu nodded approvingly. "That's a good start," he said. "Real change begins when people can say that." The cafe grew still again, But the tension had melted into something softer, an uneasy humility shared by everyone inside. The same customers who had once whispered in judgment now looked at Jose differently. He wasn't invisible anymore. Keanu placed a few bills on the table, far more than the cost of 2 coffees. "For your staff," he said, turning to Gavin. "Use it to give someone else a free cup next time they need it." Then he turned to Jose. "You good?" Jose smiled faintly, nodding. "Yeah, for the first time in a long time, I think I am." As they both stood, a few customers began to clap quietly. It wasn't loud or theatrical. It was the kind of applause that came from respect rather than excitement. Even Gavin joined, his palms hesitant but sincere. Keanu gave him a small nod. "You'll be fine," he said. "Just remember, polish can't hide a lack of heart." Gavin lowered his head. "I won't forget that." Keanu and Jose walked toward the door together, the faint chime of the cafe bell marking not an ending, but the beginning of something new. An unseen shift in how everyone there would see the world outside. The hum of the cafe slowly returned, but the energy had shifted. The tension and embarrassment that once filled the room had turned into something gentler, something reflective. Keanu and Jose sat together again, side by side, 2 cups cooling between them as the world outside carried on, unaware that something small and significant was unfolding within those glass walls. Keanu leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Tell me about you, Jose," he said softly. "How long have you been doing this?" Jose rubbed his palms together, the faint traces of dust still clinging to his skin. "About 20 years, he said after a moment. "Started with the city when I was in my 30s. Before that, I worked construction, built houses, schools, offices, some of them not far from here." Keanu nodded slowly, listening with full attention. "What made you switch?" Jose gave a short, dry laugh. "My back," he said simply. "I fell from a scaffold one day, cracked 3 ribs, tore something in my shoulder, couldn't lift heavy tools after that. My boss said he'd call when I healed up, but you know how that goes." Keanu's eyes softened. "So, you started sweeping?" Jose smiled faintly. "Yeah, the city always needs someone to clean up. It wasn't much, but it was steady. I had 2 daughters to feed, and I wasn't about to let them see their dad quit." He paused for a moment, his gaze lowering. "Their mom, my wife, Maria, she passed about 5 years ago. Cancer. She was the strong one. I used to come home after sweeping the streets all day, and she'd already have dinner ready. Never complained about anything, even when things got bad." Keanu remained silent, his expression filled with empathy. The sound of the world faded again. There was only the quiet exchange between 2 men, one speaking of survival, the other listening as though every word carried sacred weight. "I'm sorry about your wife," Keanu said softly. Jose nodded. "Thank you. She used to tell me not to worry about what people thought of my job. The streets shine because of you, she'd say. I didn't believe her at first, but after she died, I started noticing little things. Kids playing in clean parks, people walking safely without stepping on glass. Maybe she was right." Keanu smiled faintly. "She was." Jose gave a small chuckle. "Maybe, but people don't say much. You know how it is. They walk past, pretend I'm not there. Sometimes they throw trash down right in front of me, like it's a game." Keanu leaned back slightly, exhaling. "Do you ever get thanked?" Jose laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Only by the birds. They don't talk back, but they keep me company." Keanu laughed softly too, though there was sadness behind it. "You deserve more than that," he said. "A lot more." Jose looked down, embarrassed by the compliment. "I don't need more," he replied quietly. "I just need people to stop pretending I don't exist." Keanu nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "That's what dignity is, isn't it? Being seen." Jose's eyes softened at Keanu's words. He stared at the table for a moment, tracing the rim of his coffee cup with his thumb. "You know," he said, "I used to think dignity came from money. When I was younger, I wanted to have a big house, a truck, maybe even a small company of my own. I thought that's what success meant. He paused, his voice quieter now. But after Maria died, and the girls grew up and moved out, I realized something. Success isn't about what you own. It's about not letting the world make you bitter. Keanu's lips curved into a faint smile. That's something most people never figure out, he said. Some people spend their whole lives chasing more, and they lose themselves in the process. You've kept your soul. Jose chuckled softly. Maybe. Or maybe I just don't have time to lose it. The two men laughed quietly together. It wasn't loud or forced, it was the kind of laughter that came from shared understanding. Keanu tilted his head slightly. Your daughters? Are they still in the city? Jose nodded proudly. Yeah, both of them. One's a nurse, the other teaches kindergarten. They visit when they can. They tell me to retire, but I can't sit still. When I'm sweeping, I feel useful, and I like seeing the world wake up. The sunrise belongs to people like us, you know? The ones who start early, so others can have their day. Keanu looked at him with admiration. You sound like a poet, Jose laughed, embarrassed. A poet with a broom. That's still a poet, Keanu said softly. Jose grew quiet again. You know, sometimes I wonder what my wife would think if she saw me now. Same broom, same streets, same tired shoes. But maybe she'd be proud that I didn't give up. Keanu nodded slowly. I think she'd be proud you never stopped giving. Jose swallowed hard, emotion flickering in his eyes. It's funny. I used to walk past people who looked down on me and tell myself it didn't matter. But it does. A little. Every person deserves to be looked at with respect, not pity. That's all I want for my daughters, for anyone who works with their hands. Keanu's expression was full of quiet conviction. You're right. Respect shouldn't be a luxury. It should be the default. Outside, a light breeze stirred the trees along the sidewalk. Through the window, the city shimmered in the sun. Cars passing, strangers walking, all of them unknowingly connected by the hands that kept their world clean. Jose smiled faintly, his shoulders finally relaxing. You know, this is the first time in a long time someone's actually listened to me. Keanu smiled back. Then I guess it's about time. For a moment, neither spoke. They just sat together in the stillness, two lives from different worlds converging on one truth, that kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. The cafe had gone quiet again, but this time, it wasn't out of tension. It was reverence. Even the people who had judged Jose earlier now listened, without a word, realizing they were hearing something real, something that mattered more than their own reflections in the glass. The cafe had grown still again, but it was a different kind of silence this time. It wasn't judgment or awkwardness anymore, it was awareness. The sound of spoons clinking had stopped completely, and every person who had once whispered about the dirty man sitting beside Keanu Reeves now found themselves unable to meet his eyes. A man in a tailored navy suit, seated closest to the counter, glanced at his own reflection in the polished surface of his coffee cup. He slowly slipped his hand under the table, hiding his gleaming silver watch, suddenly embarrassed by how loudly it seemed to shine. The woman beside him, who had been scrolling her phone earlier to appear uninterested, set it face down on the table. For a long time, she just stared at her hands. Across the room, the woman with the pearls, who had once muttered about Keanu making a statement, took off her sunglasses. She looked at Jose and then at Keanu, the faintest flicker of shame softening her posture. Keanu didn't seem to notice the shifting energy around him, or maybe he did, and simply chose to stay focused on the man across from him. You've worked hard your whole life, he said quietly. That deserves to be seen. Jose shrugged modestly. I just do what I can. Not much else to it. Keanu shook his head. No, there's everything to it. You show up every day. That's more than most people can say. Jose smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes creasing. Maybe that's why I keep doing it. When you stop showing up, the world forgets you. Keanu nodded. Maybe, or maybe showing up is how you remind the world you're still here. Their words hung gently between them, sinking into the room like sunlight filtering through clouds. Even those who hadn't spoken a word since the scene began could feel it, the hum of something real, unpolished, and deeply human. Jose finished the last sip of his coffee, setting the cup down carefully as if it were fragile. "Thank you," he said, glancing up, "for the drink, and for this." Keanu smiled warmly. "Don't thank me. You gave this place something it needed." Jose frowned slightly. "What's that?" "Perspective," Keanu said. A few quiet laughs broke out nearby, small and genuine. Even the barista smiled behind the counter. The tension that had once made the air thick now dissolved into something lighter, something that almost felt like relief. Jose stood slowly, brushing his hands against his vest. "Well, I should get back to work," he said. "The city doesn't clean itself." Keanu rose with him, moving in step. "Before you go," he said gently, "let's take a photo together." Jose blinked, clearly confused. "A photo?" "Yeah," Keanu said, his tone simple and steady, "because people forget what respect looks like." The words landed like quiet thunder. The cafe froze again, but this time, no one dared whisper. Jose hesitated, unsure how to respond. "You really want to take a picture with me?" he asked, glancing around the cafe as if expecting someone to laugh. "People will think it's a joke." Keanu smiled softly. "Then let them. The truth will speak louder than their laughter." The barista froze mid-step, her hand still holding a coffee pot. Gavin, standing stiffly behind the counter, opened his mouth as if to protest but couldn't form the words. The cafe had turned into an audience, but the atmosphere was no longer cruel, it was reverent. Keanu pulled out his phone and stepped beside Jose. "Come on," he said warmly. "You've earned this." Jose adjusted his hat awkwardly, wiping his palms against his vest. "I don't know, sir. I'm not the kind of man who belongs in pictures." Keanu looked at him sincerely. "Every man who works with honor belongs in a picture." Jose stood still for a moment, then slowly nodded. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and unforced, like a calm gesture of friendship rather than pity. Together they faced the camera. The barista, sensing the importance of the moment, whispered, "Would you like me to take it for you?" Keanu handed her the phone. "Thanks." The barista positioned herself carefully. "Ready?" Jose took a deep breath, his shoulders still tense. "Ready," he said softly. Keanu smiled faintly, not the practiced smile of a celebrity, but something genuine, quiet, human. The camera clicked. Just one flash, one still moment, frozen in time. When the photo appeared on the screen, Jose stared at it in disbelief. That's me," he murmured. "Next to you." Keanu chuckled lightly. "No, that's us. Two people sharing a cup of coffee. Nothing more, nothing less." The barista smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "That's the best photo I've ever taken." The customers who had been silently watching finally exhaled. A few clapped softly. The sound spread, gentle but sincere. For once, it wasn't for Keanu's fame. It was for the dignity that had just been restored to a man who'd walked in thirsty and invisible. Keanu took his phone back and looked at the photo for a moment. "Would you mind if I shared this?" he asked. Jose hesitated. "You mean online?" "Yeah," Keanu said. "Maybe people need to see what respect looks like again." Jose hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If it helps someone remember that people like me exist, then sure." Keanu smiled. "It'll help more than that." Gavin stood quietly behind the counter, his expression unreadable. For the first time that morning, he didn't see a dirty vest or a man out of place. He saw someone who had given his entire life to a city that never once stopped to thank him. And he realized that the only person who had been out of place that day was himself. Keanu turned toward Jose and extended his hand. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. Jose blinked, confused. "You're the one who paid." Keanu smiled again. "Doesn't matter. You gave me something more valuable than change." And with that, they shook hands, two men connected by respect in its purest form, while the rest of the cafe watched, realizing that dignity had just been redefined right before their eyes. The photo hit the internet like a spark in dry grass. It started small, one post from the teenage girl who had filmed the entire scene. She uploaded it with a caption that read, "Keanu Reeves just shared coffee with a street sweeper after the manager told him to leave. Respect is alive." Underneath, she added the photo, Keanu smiling warmly beside Jose, who held the empty glass of water in his calloused hand. Within an hour, the post had thousands of likes. By noon, it was everywhere. People retweeted, reposted, and reshared it with hashtags like #water of respect, #Keanu and Jose, and #humanity still exists. Comments flooded in from all over the world. "This man keeps restoring my faith in people. The man who cleans our city deserves our gratitude. Imagine a world where we all acted like Keanu Reeves." The photo spread faster than any interview or movie clip Keanu had ever been part of. It wasn't about celebrity. It was about decency. The image captured something timeless. Two men, one known by millions, one known by none, both equal in kindness. By the time the afternoon sun hit Los Angeles, news outlets were already picking it up. Headlines appeared across every major platform. "Keanu Reeves shares coffee with street sweeper, teaches the world a lesson in respect." The water of respect. One photo that broke the internet for the right reason. Television hosts replayed the image on morning shows, pausing to comment on Keanu's humility. "You can't fake that kind of kindness," one anchor said. "He didn't do it for cameras. He did it because it's who he is." Meanwhile, at the cafe, panic set in. Gavin, the manager, sat in his office, scrolling through an endless flood of notifications. The cafe's official page, once filled with filtered latte art and soft jazz playlists, was now flooded with angry comments. "You kicked out a man for asking for water? Apologize to Jose. This cafe owes that man his dignity back." Even the cafe's Google rating began to fall by the minute. Customers canceled reservations. Influencers who once tagged the cafe in their posts deleted their photos. Gavin ran his hands through his hair, staring at the screen in disbelief. "It's everywhere," he muttered. "Everywhere." The barista, standing nearby, tried to speak. "Maybe it's not bad, sir," she said gently. "People are seeing that something good happened here too." But Gavin didn't hear her. All he saw was his carefully built reputation unraveling. For years, he had focused on polish, exclusivity, and image. Now, one act of kindness had undone it all, and yet, deep down, he couldn't deny that something inside him felt strangely lighter. As the world debated, Keanu remained silent. No press release, no interviews, no social media post. He didn't need to add anything. The photo said it all. Respect wasn't about who you were, it was about how you treated others. By evening, the photo had reached every corner of the internet. Major outlets ran headlines celebrating it, and talk shows began discussing the story as if it were an event that had shifted something in the culture. In a world tired of scandals and outrage, the image of one man giving another a moment of dignity became a symbol of what people longed for: kindness without condition. Across social media, artists painted digital portraits of the moment. One illustration showed Jose holding his broom like a medal while Keanu stood beside him, the words "Respect is contagious" written across the top. Another post showed the caption, "He cleans the city, Keanu cleaned our hearts." People began sharing their own stories. In response, stories of janitors, bus drivers, and sanitation workers who had touched their lives quietly and without recognition. Under one post, a user wrote, "My father worked 30 years cleaning subways. No one ever said thank you." I wish he could see this photo. The cafe, once known for its exclusivity, had become a lesson in humility overnight. By the next morning, television crews were parked outside, filming segments titled "Where Kindness Happened." The irony wasn't lost on Gavin, who stood inside staring at the flashing cameras through the window. Reporters wanted a statement, but he didn't know what to say. He finally called his staff together, his voice quieter than usual. "We messed up," he said, "and maybe we deserve what's happening. But maybe we can fix it too." The barista, who had handed Jose the cup of coffee, nodded. "We could invite him back," she suggested. "Make it right." Gavin hesitated, his pride still holding on, but the truth was undeniable. "Find him," he said finally. "Tell him we owe him more than an apology." While the cafe scrambled for redemption, Keanu went on with his life, as if nothing had happened. He didn't read the headlines or answer calls from journalists. He had no interest in turning the moment into a spectacle. When a friend later asked him why he hadn't said anything publicly, Keanu simply replied, "The photo already said enough. If people understand it, they don't need my voice." Jose, on the other hand, didn't even own a smartphone. He learned about the photo from his daughter, who ran into his room one morning holding her phone like a trophy. "Dad," she cried, "you're all over the news." Jose frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" She handed him the phone. There it was, the photo. His face beside Keanu's, the empty glass of water in his hand. Thousands of comments flooded the screen, praising his work, his humility, his spot, strength. For a long time, Jose just stared at it. "I didn't do anything special," he whispered. His daughter smiled, through tears. "You didn't have to. You just reminded people what goodness looks like." In the days that followed, strangers began recognizing Jose on the street. Some stopped to shake his hand. Others offered to buy him breakfast. City officials reached out, thanking him for his service. But Jose stayed humble through it all. "I was just thirsty," he'd tell people with a shy laugh. The rest was Mr. Reeves. But those who heard the story knew better. They understood that it wasn't just about Keanu's kindness. It was about the dignity of a man who had carried quiet grace through decades of being unseen. And so the photo, just one image, two men, one glass of water, became something larger than either of them. It became proof that humanity, no matter how buried beneath noise and pride, still lived in simple moments, when one person looked at another and truly saw them. Keanu never commented publicly, but in his home, the printed photo rested quietly on a shelf beside a framed picture of his mother and a small note that read, "Kindness is the only thing that keeps dignity alive." The morning after the photo went viral, the story had already become a national conversation. Every major news network had run a segment on it, and hashtags tied to the event were trending across multiple platforms. Talk shows played the image over and over again, the now iconic picture of Keanu Reeves sitting beside Jose Mendez, smiling as if they'd been lifelong friends. On one popular morning show, the host leaned forward and said, "You know, this photo isn't about celebrity. It's about humanity. Keanu's humility reminds us what we've lost: empathy." Her co-host nodded in agreement. "Exactly," he added. "In a world obsessed with status and image, this man chose kindness, and it exposed something deep about how far we've drifted from seeing each other as equals." Clips of these discussions flooded social media. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to be part of the conversation. Psychologists were invited onto programs to talk about performative kindness, only to conclude that there was nothing performative about what Keanu had done. It was real, raw, and completely unplanned. Meanwhile, across Los Angeles, Jose's quiet life began to change. For years, he had walked the same route with his broom and dustpan, invisible to those who passed him. But now, the same streets he once cleaned in silence buzzed with recognition. People honked from their cars and waved. Others stopped to hand him coffee, bottled water, or handwritten notes. One morning, Jose arrived at his usual corner to find a small pile of gifts waiting for him: cards, flowers, and thank you letters wrapped in ribbons. One note simply read, "You reminded us that every job matters." Another said, "You gave my son someone new to look up to." He stood there in disbelief, holding the letters against his chest. For a man who had lived most of his life unseen, the attention felt overwhelming. A few days later, a representative from the mayor's office showed up at his site. Workplace with an envelope. "Mr. Mendez," she said with a smile, "the city wants to recognize your years of service. The mayor himself would like to meet you next week." Jose blinked, completely stunned. "Me? Why?" "Because you reminded everyone what pride in work really looks like," she said. Jose laughed softly, shaking his head. I didn't do anything special. I just needed water. The woman smiled. Sometimes the smallest things wake up the biggest hearts. That night, Jose told his daughters about the invitation. They cried on the phone, proud and speechless. Mom would have loved this, one of them said through tears. Jose smiled, his voice steady. She's probably laughing right now, wondering why the world is making such a fuss over a man who can't even keep his shoes clean. Across town, Keanu was sitting in his kitchen, scrolling briefly through a few headlines before turning off his phone. He hadn't said a word publicly. Dozens of reporters had reached out, requesting interviews, statements, and appearances, but he declined them all. He didn't want to turn something pure into a performance. To one persistent journalist who managed to catch him outside a studio, Keanu gave a single sentence before leaving, I didn't make a statement. I just treated a man like a man. Keanu's quiet refusal to exploit the moment only deepened people's admiration. The world was used to celebrities chasing attention, but Keanu did the opposite. He walked away from it. That silence spoke louder than any speech could have. Fans began sharing clips of his past random acts of kindness, weaving them together with a new photo. One video caption read, He's been teaching this lesson his whole life. We just started paying attention. In coffee shops, at office water coolers, and even in classrooms, people talked about the story. Teachers used it to teach empathy. This, one high school teacher told her students, showing them the photo is what respect looks like. Not grand gestures, just decency. The cafe that had once turned Jose away tried to rebuild its reputation. Gavin posted an official apology online, writing, We made a mistake. We forgot what service really means. We are grateful to Mr. Mendez for reminding us. He attached a pledge to donate part of the cafe's proceeds to the city's Sanitation Workers Fund. Comments poured in, some skeptical, others supportive. But most agreed on one thing: the cafe had been humbled, and perhaps that was the point. As for Jose, the attention didn't change his rhythm. Every morning, he still woke before dawn, still pushed his broom down the cracked sidewalks, still greeted the bakery owner who left him an extra pastry by the door. Yet everything around him felt a little brighter. People smiled now. They saw him. One afternoon, a small boy ran up to him, clutching a crayon drawing. It showed Jose holding a broom beside a tall man with black hair. Above it were the words, "Heroes don't wear capes." Jose laughed, his throat tightening. He crouched down and said, "You drew me too kind, kid." The boy grinned. "My mom says heroes are supposed to look kind." Jose folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside his vest pocket. "Then I guess I'll try to keep looking like one." That evening, when reporters tried to find Keanu again for comment, they found his assistant instead. "He doesn't want to talk about it," she told them. "He just hopes people remember the lesson, not the celebrity." Still, the story wouldn't fade. Newspapers called it the water of respect, a phrase that began appearing on posters, murals, and even billboards. It became shorthand for simple human decency, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, could ripple farther than anyone expected. And yet, amid all the noise, Keanu stayed the same. No press conferences, no self-congratulations, no social media post, just quiet gratitude that the world had taken something good from the moment. When a friend later showed him one of the murals Jose painted on a wall, holding his broom like a badge of honor, Keanu just smiled. "That's the real story," he said. "He was already a hero. I just happened to be there when the world finally noticed." 3 days later, the same cafe that had once turned Jose away sat under a different light. The morning sun poured through its windows, reflecting off the clean sidewalks outside. For the first time in a long while, the air around the place felt lighter, less polished, more human. Keanu arrived early, dressed simply as always, carrying no entourage and no hint of the global storm that photo had caused. He walked down the same street where it had all begun, the hum of traffic behind him. Ahead, Jose was at work again, pushing his broom along the curb, humming quietly to himself. The sight made Keanu smile. The man hadn't changed his route or his rhythm. Even after the attention, The news, the public praise. Jose still showed up with the same quiet pride. "Morning," Keanu called out as he approached. Jose looked up, surprised but smiling. "Mr. Reeves," he said warmly. "Didn't think I'd see you again here." Keanu grinned. "You kidding? I like your office better than most studios." Jose laughed, shaking his head. "Well, at least my coworkers don't talk back." They shared a light moment before the cafe door opened behind them. Gavin, the manager, stepped out, his posture uncertain. He looked smaller somehow, not in size, but in presence. His confidence had softened into humility. He hesitated for a moment before walking closer. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice polite but nervous. "I didn't think you'd come back here." Keanu nodded. "Places change when people learn," he said calmly. "I figured I'd see how much this one has." Gavin nodded slowly, glancing at Jose. "I owe you both an apology," he began. "What happened that day, it wasn't right. I was worried about image, about what people might think, and I forgot what actually matters." Jose leaned on his broom, smiling faintly. "You don't owe me anything. We've all made mistakes. I've had bad days too." But Gavin shook his head. "No, this isn't just about a bad day. It's about how I treated someone who didn't deserve to be treated that way. You gave this city dignity long before anyone took a picture." For a moment, none of them spoke. The sounds of the street filled the silence. The faint rumble of passing cars, a distant horn, a bird landing near the cafe sign. Finally, Gavin took a deep breath. "Mr. Mendez," he said, his tone hesitant but sincere. "We've been talking as a team. The cafe wants to start a community program to help keep this area clean and welcoming. We'd like to make it official, and we were hoping you'd join us." Jose blinked, surprised. "You mean work with the cafe?" Gavin nodded. "Yes. You've already been keeping this neighborhood beautiful for years. We'd like to help, and to recognize it, if it's something you'd consider." Keanu smiled quietly, watching the exchange. The change in Gavin's tone wasn't forced. It was genuine. Jose scratched the back of his neck, still unsure. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say yes," Keanu said softly. "Not for them, for the people who'll see what real respect looks like." Jose stood there, broom in hand, his eyes darting between Keanu and Gavin. He wasn't used to being offered things, especially not with respect. "If it means people see us differently," he said at last, "then sure, I'll do it." Gavin let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Mendez," he said quietly. "We'll cover your supplies, and maybe you could even lead workshops with the neighborhood on cleanliness and pride in work. You'd be surprised how many people want to help but don't know where to start." Jose's lips curved into a modest grin. "I'd be honored. As long as I can still use my old broom." Keanu chuckled. "That broom's part of the legend now." The three men laughed together, and for the first time since the incident, there was no awkwardness, only understanding. The cafe's staff watched from inside, smiling through the glass. The same barista who had once looked away when Jose entered now pressed her hands together, whispering, "He said yes." Gavin turned toward Keanu. "You were right," he admitted. "Respect starts small." Keanu nodded. "But it grows fast when people finally see it." Jose leaned against his broom, looking up at the morning sky. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "my wife used to tell me that no matter what happens, I should always leave a place cleaner than I found it. Maybe that's what this is about." Keanu's eyes softened. "She was a wise woman." "She was," Jose said, smiling. "She'd be laughing if she saw this." "Said I'd never be famous for sweeping." Keanu laughed quietly. "Well, looks like she was wrong about that one." Jose's chuckle faded into a warm silence. "Maybe, but fame isn't what matters. What matters is that maybe now, when people see someone sweeping a street, they'll remember we're part of the same world." Keanu nodded, his voice gentle. "That's exactly it. Respect doesn't start at the top. It starts on the ground." Gavin looked around, the street suddenly feeling brighter, alive. "We'll make sure this cafe remembers that," he said. "No more exclusive, just inclusive. We'll hang a copy of that photo inside as a reminder." Jose looked surprised. "You mean the one with me?" Gavin nodded. "Yes. It belongs here. Because this is where it started." Keanu smiled. "Good idea. Let people see what change looks like." As they stood there, a soft breeze passed through the street, carrying the faint scent of roasted coffee. The hum of the city continued, cars honking, people talking, but something deeper had shifted. Jose picked up his broom again, giving it a small twirl. "Well," he said, "time to get back to work. Can't have my new partners thinking I'm lazy." Keanu laughed. "Somehow I doubt anyone will ever think that again." Gavin extended his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Mendez. For more than just clean streets." Jose shook it firmly. "Thank you for finally seeing them." And as Keanu watched, the cafe that had once been a symbol of arrogance became something new, a place where humility had rewritten its story, one broomstroke at a time. Within a week, the cafe's transformation became the talk of the neighborhood. The once exclusive place that had prided itself on polished perfection now carried something better heart. The small sign outside, once boasting about artisan espresso, now had a new line added beneath it: "Proud partner in the Clean Streets Initiative." And right under that banner stood Jose Mendez, broom in hand, wearing a clean city-issued uniform that finally fit him properly. His name was stitched neatly above the pocket, no longer fading, no longer forgotten. Keanu visited again that morning, quietly, without fanfare. He found Jose sweeping near the corner where they had first met. The sidewalks gleamed, and a few passers-by stopped to shake Jose's hand before continuing on their way. "Looks like business is good," Keanu said with a smile. Jose chuckled, leaning on his broom. "You could say that. The cafe helped me get a contract with the city. They made it official. I'm now the sanitation manager for the whole block." Keanu grinned. "That's incredible, Jose." Jose nodded humbly. "They even gave me a team, 3 young guys from around the neighborhood. Kids who couldn't find work. Now we clean together every morning." "I tell them the same thing I tell myself. Leave every place better than you found it." Keanu looked genuinely moved. "You're leading more than just a cleanup crew, my friend." Jose shrugged modestly. "It's not leadership. It's just doing what's right." But the truth was, Jose's work had already started something bigger. The cafe's initiative had caught the attention of nearby businesses. The bookstore down the street reached out to the same city program. The bakery followed next. Before long, 4 more shops along the block signed contracts to employ local sanitation workers directly instead of outsourcing them to faceless companies. Local newspapers began to take notice. One headline read, "From street sweeper to community leader. The Keanu effect." Another article described the ripple effect spreading through Los Angeles, how one simple act of kindness between 2 strangers had changed how entire neighborhoods thought about dignity, work, and gratitude. When the mayor's office learned of the change, they issued a formal commendation for the cafe's new community partnership. In a short ceremony held right outside the shop, a small crowd gathered: neighbors, city officials, and a few reporters. Gavin, dressed more casually this time, took the microphone. "We started as a place that cared too much about image," he admitted. "But thanks to 2 men who reminded us what humanity looks like, we now care more about people. Mr. Mendez isn't just cleaning the street, he's teaching us how to walk it with respect." The crowd applauded softly. Keanu stood in the back, not wanting the spotlight. But when Jose looked his way and nodded, he stepped forward, offering a quiet smile of encouragement. For Jose, the applause wasn't about fame, it was about belonging. He'd gone from invisible to invaluable, and the city was finally seeing him for who he had always been. After the ceremony, Jose lingered near the cafe's outdoor tables, talking with neighbors who now knew him by name. Some brought their children just to meet him. Others asked how they could help. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had turned into a movement of pride. Keanu watched from a short distance, leaning against a lamppost, smiling quietly to himself. He'd seen fame create trends before, but this was something pure. People weren't following a celebrity, they were following an idea. Later that afternoon, Jose's new team arrived 3 young men from the community. Their names were Marco, Luis, and Dylan. They were in their early 20s, each with a different story but the same hunger for purpose. Marco had recently aged out of the foster system. Luis was trying to save money for college. Dylan had been laid off from a delivery job. Jose greeted them like family. "All right, boys," he said, handing out gloves and safety vests. "We're not just sweeping, we're setting an example. When people walk by, they'll see what respect looks like." Keanu, still nearby, grinned. Spoken like a leader. Jose laughed. "You keep saying that, but I'm just trying to do my job." As the team started cleaning, local photographers snapped photos not of Keanu this time, but of Jose, leading his crew down the block. The images appeared in community newspapers the next morning, alongside stories about new neighborhood initiatives. The café became a symbol of redemption. Customers began leaving small donations in a jar by the register labeled "For the hands that keep us clean." Gavin no longer worried about reputation. He had found something more valuable: purpose. "Funny," he told the barista one morning. "It took losing control to realize what real service means." Within a month, several businesses across the city reached out to replicate the program. Schools organized volunteer cleanups in Jose's name. Students made posters that read "Respect starts small" and hung them around their campuses. News anchors began calling it the Keanu effect, a quiet cultural shift born from humility. Jose didn't care for the attention. When reporters tried to interview him again, he simply said, "I'm just happy people are working together. That's what matters." One morning, Keanu stopped by again, hands in his pockets, just as Jose was finishing his rounds. "Looks like the city's catching on," Keanu said with a grin. Jose smiled, brushing dust from his sleeve. "It's strange, isn't it? I used to think change was something only important people could make. Turns out, all it takes is one act of respect." Keanu nodded. "And one man who keeps showing up." Jose chuckled. "You're part of this too, you know." "Maybe," Keanu said, "but you carried it farther than I ever could." For a moment, they stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sunlight hit the clean sidewalks. The reflections shimmered like ripples on water, stretching from one end of the street to the other. Keanu looked at Jose's crew sweeping at the far end of the block and smiled. "You realize, Jose," he said, "you didn't just clean this street, you cleaned people's hearts." Jose laughed softly. "Then I guess my wife would be proud after all." "She would," Keanu said, his voice gentle, "because she raised a man who turned work into dignity." As Jose picked up his broom again, the wind carried the faint echo of laughter, conversation, and the steady rhythm of bristles against concrete. The heartbeat of a city learning at last what respect really meant. And somewhere above that hum of life, the story of one man's thirst, one actor's kindness, and one community's awakening continued to ripple quietly but endlessly through the streets of Los Angeles. The city outside Keanu's window glowed in soft amber light. It was evening, the kind of calm that made Los Angeles seem slower, quieter, almost human again. He sat in his study, the faint hum of the city in the distance, a cup of black coffee resting beside his open notebook. The photo, the one of him and Jose, stood framed on the shelf across the room. It wasn't a grand image. There was no fancy background or perfect lighting. Just 2 men, one holding an empty glass of water, both smiling in simple understanding. Yet it had reached more hearts than any film he had ever made. Keanu opened his notebook and began to write. He didn't keep a journal for publicity or memoirs. It was private, a place where he could gather thoughts that fame never let him speak aloud. His handwriting was slow, deliberate. He wrote, "Some moments don't ask to be remembered, they just stay." He paused, thinking of Jose, the humility in his voice, the quiet pride in his work, the way his eyes carried years of labor, but no resentment. There was something sacred in that kind of strength. Keanu thought about how easily people walked past others like Jose every day. He had done it too. At times unintentionally perhaps, but still. The world had trained people to notice noise, not silence, to celebrate fame, not grace. But now he had seen firsthand how a simple act of humanity could echo louder than any movie premiere or speech. He picked up the pen again. My mother used to say that character isn't built on applause but on how you treat those who can't give you any. He smiled faintly, hearing Patricia's voice in his mind, calm, warm, practical. He could almost see her sitting by the sewing machine, pinning fabric in place, while reminding him that decency was the one thing a person could never fake. He looked at the photo again. The glass of water caught his eye, glimmering faintly under the lamplight. It wasn't much, just water, but it had become a symbol of something far greater. He wrote, "It's not about water. It's about worth. It's about seeing the human being behind the uniform, behind the job, behind the noise." Leaning back in his chair, Keanu exhaled slowly. He thought of all the messages he had received since the incident. The letters from janitors, factory workers, bus drivers, even teachers. Each one said the same thing. "Thank you for reminding the world that our work matters." He hadn't replied to any of them yet. He wasn't sure what to say. After all, he hadn't set out to teach anyone anything. He had just done what felt right. He glanced at the clock. It was late, but he wasn't tired. There was a quiet satisfaction in his chest, not pride, but peace. The kind that came from knowing that something good had grown out of something small. Keanu reached for the photo frame on the shelf and studied it more closely. The image captured more than faces. It captured a moment of truth. Jose's smile wasn't for the camera. It was the smile of a man finally seen. That, Keanu thought, was what had resonated with the world. He placed the frame gently back on the shelf, beside a small stack of mementos, an old Polaroid of his mother sewing costumes, a faded photo of his sister Kim laughing in the snow, a worn pocket notebook filled with lines from roles he'd played over the years. Every item in that corner of his study meant something. It was his quiet museum of meaning. He flipped to a new page in his journal and began writing again. People think fame teaches you about success. It doesn't. It teaches you about invisibility. You realize how easily the world forgets to look down, to notice the hands that lifted up, the janitors, the street sweepers, the bus drivers. They hold everything together, and no one claps for them. Maybe that's why this photo mattered. It reminded people what deserves applause. He set his pen down and took a slow sip of coffee, his thoughts drifting. He remembered something Jose had said. "When you stop showing up, the world forgets you." That line had stayed with him. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about the hundreds of faces he passed each day. Assistants, technicians, delivery drivers, extras on film sets. So many people who made his world function, yet most went unnoticed. He made a mental note to start learning more of their names. It seemed like the least he could do. He wrote again, "Respect isn't given. It's practiced. It's not a grand gesture. It's consistency. It's choosing to see people every day, especially when no one's watching." Outside, the city's lights blinked in the distance, like quiet stars. Somewhere out there, Jose was probably finishing his route, sweeping the same sidewalks where it all began. Keanu pictured him under the streetlights, broom in hand, maybe humming a song to himself as he worked. That image, steady, peaceful, human, felt more cinematic than anything Hollywood could script. Keanu smiled faintly, then wrote one final passage. "The world doesn't change through power. It changes through example." One glass of water, one word of respect, one quiet choice to do what's right. That's all it takes. Jose reminded me that kindness doesn't need a camera. It just needs courage. He closed the notebook slowly, his pen resting on the last line. The room was silent, except for the soft tick of the clock. His eyes drifted once more to the framed photo on the shelf. The light from the lamp reflected faintly across the glass, creating a subtle halo around Jose's face. Keanu tilted his head, smiling to himself. "It really isn't about the water," he whispered. "It never was." He turned off the lamp and sat back, letting the dim glow of the city fill the room. He could still hear the echoes of that day, the tension, the whispers, the moment the cafe fell silent. And then, Jose's laughter, quiet but real, cutting through it all. That was the sound that had stayed with him most. He imagined how his mother would have responded to the story. She would have smiled proudly, maybe teased him for getting emotional, then reminded him once again that the measure of a man wasn't in applause but in empathy. The world outside kept moving, cars humming, lights flickering, but inside his home, Keanu felt still, at peace. He didn't need the world to know what he had learned that day. It was already enough that he knew. Before leaving the room, he glanced at the photo one last time and whispered, "Thank you, Jose." Then he closed the door gently behind him, the framed image glowing softly in the lamplight. A silent reminder that worth isn't something people earn, it's something they already have. The morning sun cast a warm glow across the East Los Angeles neighborhood where everything had begun. It had been 1 year since that quiet moment in the cafe. 1 year since a glass of water had rippled into something far greater. The sidewalks were cleaner now, not just in appearance, but in spirit. People took pride in them. They smiled when they passed the sweepers, waved instead of averting their eyes. Colorful banners fluttered from lampposts, reading "Clean Streets, Clean Hearts, Community Day." The event had been Jose's idea. What started as a few volunteers cleaning the block had grown into a neighborhood celebration of unity and dignity. Children ran along the sidewalks carrying small trash grabbers, laughing as they raced to collect litter. Local shop owners stood by their doors handing out cold drinks. The air smelled of tamales, coffee, and the sweetness of change. In the center of it all stood Jose Mendez, wearing his bright orange uniform, now pressed and clean, with a city badge pinned to his chest. He wasn't just a street sweeper anymore. He was the district sanitation manager and the founder of the Clean Streets, Clean Hearts initiative. A small wooden stage had been set up outside the cafe. The same cafe that once turned him away now hosted the event every year, its staff proudly serving free water and coffee to every attendee. Gavin, the manager, was there too, helping to pass out refreshments, greeting everyone with warmth that was genuine, not rehearsed. And somewhere near the back of the crowd stood Keanu Reeves. He wore a simple black baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses covering most of his face. No one recognized him, not because he was hiding, but because he didn't want to be seen. This day wasn't about him. It was about Jose, the man whose humility had transformed a city. From his place in the crowd, Keanu smiled as he watched Jose step onto the stage. The crowd applauded warmly, not with the polite courtesy given to public figures, but with real affection. They knew him. They trusted him. Jose adjusted the microphone, clearing his throat nervously before speaking. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady but humble. "Thank you for being here. I still can't believe all this started because I was just thirsty one morning." The crowd laughed softly. Jose smiled. "I asked for a glass of water, and instead, I got a whole community." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the audience. Neighbors, workers, shop owners, and children, all standing shoulder to shoulder. "This isn't about me," he continued. "It's about what happens when people decide to see each other. Really see. The moment we stop judging someone by their clothes or their job, that's when we start living like neighbors again." The applause grew louder this time. Some people nodded, others wiped their eyes. Keanu smiled beneath his cap. It was the same lesson he had written in his journal months ago. Character wasn't built on applause, but on empathy. And Jose had become living proof of that. Jose waited for the crowd to quiet, his eyes glistening as he continued. "A lot has changed this year," he said. "We started with 1 block, now there are 30. Every week, people come together to clean their neighborhoods. Not because someone told them to, but because they care. Because they realize that when you care for the place you live, you start caring for the people who live there too." The audience broke into applause again, but Jose lifted a hand modestly, asking for calm. "I didn't do this alone," he said. "The cafe believed in the project. The city gave us a chance. And there was one man who reminded me that respect doesn't come from fame or titles, it comes from how you treat people. Keanu looked down for a moment, his smile small but full. He knew Jose wouldn't say his name, and he didn't want him to. It was enough to be there, in the background, watching the goodness unfold. Jose continued, his voice soft but full of pride. One man poured water, and the rest of us found hope. Those words hung in the air, gentle but powerful. The crowd erupted in applause again, louder this time, standing to honor the man who had once been invisible to them. Cameras flashed, children waved their small brooms in the air, and a few people began chanting Jose's name. Keanu's chest tightened with quiet emotion. He looked around at the smiling faces, the families, the volunteers, all united by something that had started so small. It was proof that kindness didn't end where it began. It multiplied, passed from one person to another, like sunlight bouncing off glass. When the applause faded, Jose stepped down from the stage, shaking hands and laughing with friends. Gavin approached him and clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, Jose," he said warmly. "You've made this cafe proud." Jose smiled. "You made it possible. We all did." As the crowd began to disperse, Keanu made his way toward the back alley, hoping to leave quietly. But Jose spotted him. Their eyes met, and Jose grinned, walking over. "You thought you could sneak out?" Keanu laughed softly. "I was trying not to steal your spotlight." Jose shook his head. "You didn't steal it, you gave it back." They stood together for a moment, watching the children continue to play in the street, their laughter echoing between buildings. "Look at that," Jose said. "I never thought sweeping streets would lead to something like this." Keanu looked at him with genuine admiration. "That's the thing about good deeds," he said. "You never know how far they'll go. You just do them anyway." Jose smiled, his eyes warm. "You ever think about how simple it was? Just a glass of water." Keanu nodded. "Yeah, but the right glass, at the right time, can change everything." They both laughed, softly. The crowd around them began to sing. A group of children had started a small chant, "Clean streets, clean hearts," clapping their hands in rhythm. As the sun dipped lower, Keanu adjusted his cap, ready to leave. He gave Jose one last nod of respect. "You did more than clean streets, Jose. You cleaned people's perspective." Jose chuckled. "Maybe we both did." Keanu smiled one last time, then turned to walk down the quiet street, the sound of laughter and hope following behind him like a gentle echo. The sun had nearly set over the Los Angeles skyline, casting long golden streaks across the sidewalks that now gleamed from a full day of laughter, work, and unity. The sound of brooms brushing pavement mixed with soft music drifting from the cafe, the same place where it all began. The banner still hung proudly between two lampposts. "Clean streets, clean hearts," its edges fluttering gently in the evening breeze. Keanu walked slowly down the block, his cap pulled low, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket. People waved as they passed Jose and his team cleaning up after the event, their faces still glowing with the joy of the day. It was a sight that spoke louder than any headline. Ordinary people rediscovering what kindness could look like when put into motion. He stopped at the corner, looking back at the street. There was no glamour here, no spotlight, no cameras, just people doing something good together. He smiled quietly to himself. A light breeze brushed past him as if carrying the memory of that first morning, the cafe door opening, Jose asking for a glass of water, and the silence that followed before one small decision changed everything. And then, in the quiet rhythm of thought, came the words he had written months ago, now finding their way to the surface again. Keanu's voice, calm and steady, carried softly, as if speaking to the audience directly. "Maybe kindness can't fix the world overnight," he said, "but it can clean one corner of it. And sometimes, that's enough." His words lingered in the air, weaving through the sounds of laughter and sweeping bristles. The image of Jose smiling under the evening sky appeared again in his mind. The man hadn't changed the world with speeches or money, but with work steady, unseen, and noble. Keanu took another step down the sidewalk, his boots tapping gently against the pavement. A small group of children ran past him, chasing one another with paper brooms they had made during the event. They laughed loudly, free of the judgment that had once filled that same block. He smiled again, realizing that maybe, just maybe, this was what change really looked like. He turned one last time before leaving the street, watching Jose talk with neighbors, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke. The man's laughter echoed softly. That sound, the sound of restored dignity, was what stayed with Keanu. Sometimes, he whispered to himself, hope just needs a little water to grow. The faint music from the cafe swelled in the background, gentle piano chords mixed with the sound of conversation. The tone, peaceful and full. It wasn't dramatic. It was human. And as Keanu continued down the block, disappearing into the soft glow of the evening, his voice carried once more, blending with the music, like a final reflection shared from one heart to another. The music continued, calm and soulful, as the camera moved through the neighborhood Jose had helped transform. The sidewalks shone under the amber streetlights. Murals now decorated the walls, one showing Jose with his broom, surrounded by smiling children, another of a glass of water shimmering in sunlight. Beneath it were painted words that read, "Respect starts small." The cafe was still full, not with customers chasing status, but with neighbors sharing stories. A young woman helped an elderly man carry his groceries. A child held the cafe door open for a stranger. Everywhere, simple gestures spoke louder than words. The frame lingered on Jose for a moment. He leaned on his broom, watching his team finish the last section of the block. The evening wind lifted his cap slightly, revealing the same calm smile he had worn the day he met Keanu. In that smile, the audience could see the full circle of the story: humility, dignity, and peace. Then, the scene faded softly to Keanu's voice once more. "I used to think changing the world meant doing something big," he said. "But maybe it just means seeing the small things that already make it better. A smile, a gesture, a glass of water." As he spoke, images from earlier moments appeared again, the tense silence in the cafe. Jose's trembling hands holding the glass, Keanu's quiet defiance in the face of judgment, and the ripple of change that followed. His voice continued, low and reflective. The world doesn't change because of noise. It changes because of notice. Because someone decides to look up to see the person they were never taught to see. The music swelled gently as the camera returned to the framed photo that started it all. Keanu and Jose sitting side by side. For a moment, the shot lingered on the empty glass of water between them, catching the reflection of the streetlights outside. Keanu's voice softened. "Maybe kindness can't fix the world overnight, but it can clean one corner of it, and sometimes that's enough." There was a pause, just long enough for the weight of the words to sink in. The screen slowly faded to black, leaving only Keanu's voice, warm and thoughtful. Because the truth is, we don't need to be extraordinary to make a difference. We just need to notice, to care, to pour a little kindness where the world has run dry. The piano melody lingered, gentle and full of hope. Then came the closing questions, the ones that invited reflection and community, the very heartbeat of the story. Keanu's tone turned soft, almost conversational, as though speaking directly to the viewer. "Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed how people treated one another?" A brief silence followed, letting the question breathe. Then came the second, filled with quiet warmth. "What kind of story would you like to see next with Keanu Reeves?" The screen brightened once more, showing the words, "Clean streets, clean hearts," fading into the glow of dawn. Children's laughter echoed faintly, joined by the rhythmic sound of sweeping bristles, steady, patient, unending. And in that sound, the audience could still hear Jose's voice from earlier that day. "One man poured water, and the rest of us found hope." The music rose to a final soft chord, before fading out completely, leaving behind only stillness, the kind of stillness that comes when something true has been said.